Welcome to this episode of the Canada History Society's series on British Columbia and Confederation, where we examine the establishment of the colony of British Columbia and its entry into Canadian Confederation. It is one of the ironies of empire that great colonies are often born not out of plan but out of panic. In the case of British Columbia, the panic began in 1858 with the sudden arrival of thousands of gold seekers pouring into the Fraser Canyon. Most were Americans. Many carried pistols and shovels in the same hand, and few gave thought to British law or British sovereignty. The British response, long ponderous and slow in other corners of the globe, in this case came with rare urgency. The creation of the colony of British Columbia in August of 1858 was not the result of careful colonial expansion, but a defensive maneuver, a rapid assertion of imperial control over an ungoverned wilderness, suddenly teeming with foreigners and fortune seekers. Governor James Douglas, then head of the colony of Vancouver Island, and a long-serving official of the Hudson's Bay Company, had sounded the alarm. He warned London that without swift action, this territory may pass from British control as quietly as smoke on the wind. The British Colonial Office, under Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton, acted decisively. A royal proclamation established a new colony, British Columbia, named to reflect both British control and the region's geographical link to the Columbia River, which had already become the identifying artery of the Pacific Northwest. The name was a political act, writes historian Margaret Ormsby, a claim not just to land, but to continuity with Britain's wider imperial map. Queen Victoria herself is said to have approved it, preferring British Columbia over more grandiose alternatives like New Caledonia or Columbia alone, names which risk confusion with the United States and its manifest ambitions. The capital was chosen in 1859 and named New Westminster, a decision rooted not in sentiment but in strategy. Situated inland along the north side of the Fraser River, it was far enough from Victoria to avoid American influence and close enough to the goldfields to serve as an administrative hub. The decision was guided by Colonel Richard Clement Moody, a proud Englishman with aristocratic bearing and a strong sense of imperial architecture. Moody, who led the Royal Engineers, envisioned a city of grandeur and authority and named it in homage to Westminster, the seat of Parliament and the symbolic heart of Britain. He would later call New Westminster the pride of the Empire on the Pacific. Moody had arrived with a corps of Royal Engineers, known officially as the Columbia Detachment, roughly 150 strong, including officers, non-commissioned men, and their families. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were trained in civil engineering, cartography, and infrastructure, Britain's tool makers of empire, sent not to fight, but to build. They surveyed the land, mapped the rivers, cleared forests, and designed towns with the precision of a draftsman's hand. In every ditch and roadbed, writes historian Jean Barman, the engineers left the blueprint of imperial order. At the center of this imperial project remained James Douglas, now appointed governor of both Vancouver Island and British Columbia, though only after he resigned his long-standing post with the Hudson's Bay Company to avoid a conflict of interest. He ruled the twin colonies with a stern paternalism and a keen eye for balance. Douglas knew that roads were not just paths for wagons, they were veins of authority, channels through which law, commerce, and loyalty could flow. Perhaps his most audacious achievement was the Cariboo Wagon Road. Begun in 1862 and completed in stages through some of the most unforgiving terrain in North America. The road, which stretched over 400 miles from Yale to Barkerville, was constructed to support the burgeoning Cariboo Gold Rush. Blasted through canyons and hewn from mountainsides, it cost an astronomical £750,000. a sum that nearly bankrupted the colony. Yet Douglas was unrelenting. "If we are to hold this country," he wrote, "we must reach into it." And reach he did. The road remains, in the word of Ormsby, a feat of empire as much psychological as it was physical. The economy of the new colony was always precarious. The gold rush brought temporary prosperity, but not permanence. Budgets strained under the weights of roads, public works, and the cost of importing civil servants from Britain. Douglas's government, reliant on customs duties, mining licenses, and land sales, often ran deficits. Taxation was minimal, but unevenly enforced, and the colonial debt grew even as London urged frugality. The colony was, as one Foreign Office official dryly noted, a possession of great beauty and limited solvency. In this wild and shifting landscape came a figure of monumental gravity, Judge Matthew Begbie. Appointed Chief Justice of British Columbia in 1858, Begbie arrived at the height of the gold rush and quickly earned the nickname the Hanging Judge. The name, while dramatic, belied his true legacy. Trained at Cambridge and called to the English bar, Begbie brought legal order to the land that knew only frontier justice. He rode by horseback across the colony, holding court in tents, saloons, and open fields.
In 1864, in the Dakota War in Minnesota, 364 Dakota were killed in consequence of their political uprising. It's one of the horrors of American history. It's a mass killing, 1864 in Minnesota. Nothing like that happens under Matthew Begbie in British Columbia. He is an attractive figure. He arrives above politics. He is a government man, but he's also respects British law on the frontier, irrespective of anybody's nationality or culture or race on the frontier. So he is an admirable fellow. He dies in 1894. The funeral that is given for Begbie is one of veneration. It's the largest of all the funerals that had been held in British Columbia. He is rightly remembered in the Begbie Room at the Union Club, where there's a very beautiful oil portrait of him on the wall. There also in the Union Club is a wonderful bronze statuette of Begbie on a horse. Now, of course, in our times, when we are either trying to invert history or cancel history, these figures of our past, James Douglas, Pemberton surveyor, Joseph Trutch, the lieutenant governor who changes the Indian boundaries on the reserves, Begbie, they're all up as attacks, subjects of attack. This is what happens in democratic societies where history is not read properly or not read at all. And but if you look at the circumstances of a new country who needing a new soft policy in law and order, Begbie's your man, and he's a most admirable figure and was deeply beloved in his time. It's not his fault that today people want to invert the history and change their views on Begbie. They would be wise to try to sit in his shoes, or those of James Douglas for that matter, and see how they would have done things on the spot. So that's our famous Judge Matthew Begbie. Undoubtedly, one of the great judicial figures of Canadian and imperial history, and certainly in that of British Columbia.
Begbie's judgments were widely respected, and he became known for his strict adherence to law and his surprising empathy. He presided over civil and criminal cases alike, And though he did hand down capital sentences in accordance with the law, he also worked diligently to protect Indigenous rights in land disputes and criminal trials. He insisted that Aboriginal testimony be treated as credible, writes historian Tina Liu, a radical stance for the time. Begbie also required that interpreters be used in court and resisted mob justice even when pressured by settlers. Yet the expansion of colonial society, with its roads, law courts, and influx of settlers, had a profound and often devastating impact on Indigenous communities. Many had participated in the early gold rush economy, trading goods, guiding miners, or working claims. But as settlement deepened and the colonial state expanded, they found themselves pushed to the margins. The Royal Engineers' surveys formalized land into parcels for purchase, disregarding traditional territories. Disease, alcohol, and displacement followed. As historian Robin Fisher writes, contact turned quickly into conflict, and conflict into control. James Douglas, to his credit, attempted to preserve peace. His earlier treaties in Vancouver Island, though flawed, sought to legally acquire land. On the mainland, he advocated for reserves and fair treatment, but as immigration increased and political pressure grew, his influence waned. The colony he built on principle and persistence would, after his retirement in 1864, begin to lurch toward greater debt and deeper assimilation. In the span of a decade, a wilderness had been transformed. Gold had drawn men from every continent. Roads had pierced the interior. Laws had been written in dust and enforced in stone. A colony born of urgency had become in every sense British Columbia. British in name, economy, law, and ambition. Join us next time for Part 4 of the Canada History Society's 20-part series as we explore the union of the colonies of Vancouver Island and British Columbia. Consolidation.